That was a frightfully red mark near her neck. He coughed a little, terribly embarrassed. Had he bit her that hard? She'd left a mark or two on his chest, but one near her nape was so very visible. Most people would see it and begin to gossip. Bah, let them, the pious pack of parasites. What did they know, anyway? Somewhere near the bluffs of King's Landing, he could feel Valerian stirring, eager to fly and hunt.
Good for him. He had more pressing concerns. He laid one palm over his eyes and contemplated rising to face the day, but he was quite comfortable where he was. In truth, he had no real desire to move. He ran a hand through her hair, drawling a pleased noise from her, even in her slumber. She cuddled closer, practically clinging to him, lips creasing in a pout. Yup, definitely not moving now. Patiently, he settled into wait. His faith was rewarded. Soon enough, his intended began to stir. Slowly at first, then quickly now as she came around. Her eyes fluttered open to meet his, widened for a moment. He saw the precise second she remembered, because rather than retreat as she might have before, she scooted closer and pressed herself into him with wanton abandon. Her lips alighted upon his chin in a long, lingering kiss. "Good morning, my prince." Prince, not lord. 4 little words, and yet they conveyed so much. So many things. A morning greeting, a plea not to be pushed away, and beneath it all, lust. She wasn't trying to manipulate him. No one could, and he'd not let them. Far from it, she simply didn't want to let go of him. He kissed her forehead in return. She moved to stand, reluctant to leave. "I should go, eh?" Desire sparked in him, and he grabbed at her wrist.
"I can't." She dithered but didn't try to break free. "We should have waited until we were wed. People will talk." "I don't care." He was so very sick and tired of caring, of fretting and fussing over the rules.
"I know." The ghost of a smile tugged at her lips. "That's I'll come back later tonight." Why? So they could dance around this and hide it from everyone? Keep it secret? No, no, no. He wasn't having it. If only because he knew how such things ended. So did Alicent, judging by the look in her eye. Why hide it now? They had nothing to lose, and everything to gain. Maybe it was foolish to flaunt this, but he was so very tired skulking about in the shadows. Nay. No more. No longer. No. He bit off the word, no more hiding. He gave her a gentle tug, drew her back into his lap, and kissed her softly on the lips. She quivered against him. "We shouldn't." "We absolutely should. Who cares what they say?" Another kiss, and she responded to him with a moan. "You make a compelling argument." "Of course I do." He kissed the nape of her neck, drawing a pleased noise from her. "Do you want to keep hiding, or do you want to live?" A rhetorical question, of course. He already knew her answer, and so did she. He felt her resolve weakening with every kiss. Little anxious gasps of raw excitement fleeing from her lips as he tormented her with a torrent of kisses. It was only a matter of time. He watched the conflict flash across her face as he kissed her breasts, saw her struggle against her carnal desires a moment more, and fell. Soon enough, she began to respond in kind to his ministrations, her arms looped around his neck, then her hands his hair as she held on for dear life. She was wet and ready for him, bouncing in his lap. It did wonderful things to breasts, the brief pain of last night forgotten in its entirety. In a matter of moments, she was writhing under his touch, locking her legs around his waist, the better to draw him deeper. He saw the fire in her eyes, the refusal to let go until he gave her what she wanted. By contrast, her release came quickly, laying her beneath his touch. She fell back to the bed with a pleased sigh.
Not yet satisfied, he began lavish kisses upon her lips, followed by her breasts, lower now, his lips alighting upon her thighs, which he gently tugged apart.
She made a noise of confusion. "What are you?" Then he kissed her. "There." Alicent gasped aloud, a noise of such visceral delight that he stopped for fear of having hurt her. He paused and she glared at him from where she lay, face flushed red, gasping for air, his hands still on her knees. The ghost of a smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, and she flushed anew. "Don't stop." It was a cry for more as much as a plea. He returned his attention to her folds, while she covered her mouth with one hand to stifle the little gaps of delight that fled from her lips. They didn't leave their room until the afternoon. They couldn't have. Rhaenyra didn't want to believe it. Surely they wouldn't do such an awful thing to her.
When Lord Larry Strong told her of what he'd seen, she hadn't wanted to believe him. It wasn't possible. But the signs were all there, if one knew where to look. She had seen it all, hiding round the corner. She dearly wished she hadn't, if only because the sight was now burned into her mind, hotter than any flame. Alicent had emerged from Naruto's chambers with her hair down, face flushed and clothes ruffled. That was damning enough. And then she'd seen it. Oh, yes, she saw it all. Her dear friend, the one person whom she trusted more than anyone else, turned back at the door as though to speak to someone, and then he had been there. Holding her, letting her throw her arms round his neck and they'd shared a long lingering kiss.
She'd only seen a glimpse of it before darting back into cover, but Alicent had departed soon thereafter. She'd heard the click of her heels, even if she hadn't dared to look. Naruto had left some time afterward, looking not smug but content. He never noticed her, never even deigned to check her little hideaway. And so she hid back behind the pillar and waited there, unwilling to move, until the last of his footsteps receded into the distance. With their absence, her heart broke.
Misery, 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 that was what he'd chosen. She had to confront him, had to say something, but calmly. She must be calm. She mustn't lose her temper. She must, saw it all.
Her rage was rising, her temper triggered, her wrath roused. She wanted to shout and scream and spit, to show him what it was like to be hurt, to know pain.
Perhaps she should show him what it felt like.
Viserys raised his cup. "You seem quite pleased with yourself, old friend." Otto hid a smile behind his chalice as he drank. Fair question indeed. Was he pleased? Yes, he was. He found he was, remarkably, given all that had transpired. Events, and Alicent, had exceeded his expectations tenfold. His dutiful daughter had done her duty without being asked. Indeed, she seemed to have the prince well in hand. Why, it was as if she actually loved him. Nonsense, of course. Alicent would do her duty. She would bear the prince's children.
The throne would belong to the Hightowers.
Nothing would stand in the way of that. Nothing could.
Naruto knew there would be trouble as soon as he saw Rhaenyra's face. He could see it there behind her eyes, the anger boiling just below the surface. She was hurt, betrayed, furious. He could understand the former, but not the latter. Why react in such a manner? She acted as if she owned him, as though he were hers to claim. He was not. Nothing could be further from the truth. He was his own man. If she had a problem with this, she should have said something. Anything. But she hadn't now, had she? On a whim, he let her lead him to her quarters, the better to speak in sense. And well that he did, because the moment, nay, the very second the door closed behind him. You would choose her. A goblet bounced off his chest, spattering wine across his doublet. Over me. Ah, so she knew, then. I'm not choosing anyone over anyone. He ignored the spread stain, took her by the hands and tried to guide her back to the chair. Calm down, and let's talk about this. Is that all you have to say? Rhaenyra smacked his hand away with a hiss that reminded him so much of Syrax. You have chosen. I saw you with her. And what of it? He flung up his arms exasperated. Why does it matter to you? Naruto saw the answer in her eyes and winced. Oh, dear.
He'd never really thought of, not considered.
Look, if you're that upset, doesn't have to be just the two of us. He lowered his voice to a placating tone. Alicent cares deeply for you, she'd never deny you anything. If you'd just talk with her and explain yourself your feelings, she'd welcome you with open arms. We can work this out among ourselves and come to an agreement. No need to throw things. It was the wrong thing to say, and he knew at the moment she went absolutely still against him. You would have me be second to her.
That's not what I'm saying. Stop putting words in my mouth.
I am no one's whore. I'm not calling you one. Here at last, his temper slipped its leash. If anything, you're acting like a spoiled brat. Rhaenyra's face closed down, eyes hardening to chips of stone. Get out. Stubborn girl, if you'd just listen to me, you'd see. She slapped him. Get out. His temper sparked. Mustn't give in. If that's what you want. He heaved a sigh. I'll give you some time to think. Her goblet bounced off his head. Out.
Must remain calm. As you wish.
He steeled himself and walked away from her. The door slammed shut on him, striking his flank. He took the blow with quiet dignity and kept walking.
After all, he'd made his choice.
Now it fell to Rhaenyra to make hers. He heard her sobs echo through the hall after him. It was the beginning of the end, but to what he knew not. Quote, I shall wear this like a badge of honor.
Wear it in silence or I will honor you again. Future scene. Hail to the one.
Battle lines had been drawn. Naruto saw them in every face he passed as he stalked through the halls towards the Iron Throne, flanked by his guards. Heard them in every whisper. Tasted them in the very tension of the air. Truth be told, he no longer cared for the Red Keep's simple spite and gutless gossip. He had made his choice and he would live with it. The nobles only shamed themselves by acting like this. It was inevitable, he supposed, perhaps even naive of him to believe otherwise, but he'd held out hope that everything would be alright once word of him and Alicent got out. In his foolishness, he'd believed the House of the Dragon would grow stronger once he announced their engagement, that the realm hold itself together.
Instead, it had begun to fracture all too easily.
All this in little more than a year. How quickly things changed. How quickly the nobles turned on another. Viserys did little to help. He seemed content to step back and let him speak in his stead these days. Today was another such day, forcing him to mediate the disputes of the realm and tend to other matters beyond his ken. He suspected his uncle would have handed the crown to him directly if he could get away with it. Only tradition and duty kept him from doing so, which was all to the good, so far as Naruto was concerned. He wasn't prepared to rule yet. He had enough to contend with already.
Parasites, the lot of them. Even now some simpered for his sake while others glared at him.
All the while their words nagged at him in an endless animal bleat. There he goes again. Demon's boy. Getting too big for his britches if you ask me. Not even married and making Hightower's daughter spread her legs for him, she's some common whore. Has he no shame?
Shh. He'll feed you to his dragon. He memorized their faces, smiled at them, and filed their names away for retribution. Tarkus rumbled a sigh behind his helm. Say the word and we'll clear out this pack of parasites for you. Havel grunted his agreement, eager to give his dragon tooth club a swing. He had even less patience for such things. It would be our pleasure, Your Grace.
Your Grace. Ha, he wasn't even king yet, and everyone was acting like it was a foregone conclusion. Many of these people had bowed and sworn homage on the day Viserys named him heir, yet they turned their noses up at him now, not only because he'd bedded Alicent before marriage, oh no, but because the people loved him. The common folk couldn't stop singing his praises these days. His weekly oceanic jaunts with Balerion had seen Fleabottom eating better in this last year than it had in decades. The city feasted on a hefty bounty of whale and fish these days. Loved by the common folk, hated by the houses. Oh, the irony. Sometimes he wondered if it wouldn't just be easier to simply burn the nobles and be done with it. Just burn them all. Put the fear of fire in them right and proper, ya know. At least the people of the realm contributed in their own way. They tilled the fields, ran the inns, sold their wares. What good were the nobles? Clinging to some semblance of importance, all thanks to their father's father or some sick. It made him sick. So few of them did anything good for the realm anymore.
He laid a hand on the hilt of his sword. More than a few noble sons and daughters flinched outright.
Tempting, but no, he said the words for their sake, as much as his own. They get to live, for now. Naruto stalked past them, climbing the steps to the throne. Tarkus and Hobble peeled off at the second step, ready to defend him if need be.
There would be no need. He knew. He was perfectly capable of defending himself.
The Iron Throne beckoned to him. He didn't want to sit in this damn chair and play court. No, he wanted to fly away to the stepstones and help Demon Father burn out the crabfeeder. He knew he couldn't, because that would leave Alicent and Rhaenyra alone. They'd tear one another to pieces. Rhaenyra has grown increasingly cold as the months went by, but as his friendship with her chilled, his relationship with Alicent only grew hotter. Alicent at least remained hopeful, desperate even to talk with her, but Rhaenyra simply wouldn't let her near. She wasn't letting anyone near, come to think of it. No one but that new knight of hers, Sir Criston Cole. What she did with him, if she did anything, was her own affair, but she was becoming outright hostile. It felt like the world stood on a knife's edge. The slightest nudge would send it flying off into salvation or disaster. He wasn't sure which. And all this, because he loved Alicent.
Really? He did. He despised the idea of giving Otto more power, but he did care for his daughter. Her father would have to go, however, and soon, be it dismissal or an accident. Simple as. As to the how, he hadn't decided, but it had to be done. And soon. Before this pack of parasites got any more ideas. Balerion stirred on the cliffs, sensing his thoughts.
I hunger. Naruto sighed. Hunger, was it? So did he. By the gods, he was starving for some action. He flung himself down on the Iron Throne, almost wishing it would cut him.
It didn't, of course. That would be too easy. His gaze sought the crow below him, and a sigh slipped from his lips. Shall we begin?
It would appear that congratulations are in order, dear daughter of mine.
Alicent knew that tone of voice far, far too well. It was nothing good. They are, I suppose. She picked at her food. Thank you.
She willed herself not to look up from her meal, carefully carving the steak before her into bite-sized morsels as father looked on. It was not for her to falter here. She couldn't. She mustn't. She refused. If she looked at him now before she worked up the nerve, she would be lost. And that must not happen. He had no power over her, now. Not anymore. No matter what he might think.
Whenever is the wedding?
Whenever we wish. She lifted the fork to her lips and took a delicate bite, chewed, swallowed, then set to another. She, most pointedly, did not drink her wine. ... I see. She could almost hear the disappointment in her lord father's voice. The sooner you wed him, the better. This isn't about family, this is about securing our legacy.
Her fingers tightened white-knuckled around her knife and fork. I love him. Of course you do.
It was clear by his tone that Otto Hightower didn't believe her. Perhaps he was incapable of it. How cold his heart must be. It was hard, downright difficult at times, to believe she'd once called this man her father. Mother's death had changed him, and not for the better. These days he sought power and prestige above all else, no, to the exclusion of all else. She wondered if he even saw her as his daughter anymore. Doubtless she was just a pawn to him like so many others.
When we wish.
He scoffed. I beg your pardon. Here at last Alicent looked upon the man she once called father. I said, it will be when we wish. She fixed him with a steely glare. You did not choose him for me. I chose him and he chose me. Thus, it will be when we wish. He and I, not before.
He looked surprised, but didn't challenge her for once.
As you wish. Instead he steepled his fingers, laid his chin atop them, and attacked her where she was weakest. Still, an obstacle remains. I understand the princess is most distressed. Alicent's blood ran cold at the unspoken threat lurking within his words. Rhaenyra will see reason. Father tilted his head. Will she? I understand she's been quite emotional as of late. She squeezed her knife harder, aching to drive it through his skull.
Emotional, he said. Of course she was. It had been some time since she and Naruto begun their nightly endeavors, and she had feared this might happen. Oh gods, she would have to confront Rhaenyra before he did her worst, before father took it into his head and decided to have her removed. As though she didn't already know what they were doing. There was something else. Something she didn't dare speak of, not aloud.
She touched a hand to her belly, and took a deep breath. For the future. Alicent found her in the grove. There she sat under the weirwood tree, shoulders hunched, peering into a book in the fading sunlight. Well, glaring more like. She didn't so much turn the pages as she did attack them, flipping from one to the next, every few seconds with a brisk and savage dispatch. Alicent couldn't help but wince at the sight. She'd seen that scowl of hers many a time before and it was as much a warning as her silence.
Rhaenyra?
No response given. Won't you answer me?
Silence reigned. No words whatsoever.
Please, if we could just talk about this. She came closer, but her dear friend refused to even look in her direction. Alicent felt her heart clench in her chest. No, be brave. She'd known this would be an uphill battle from the start. Rhaenyra had a fierce temper, and a right to be angry, she supposed. They'd spent so long dancing around the matter now that she couldn't help herself. Their friendship, if it could be called that anymore, dangled by a thread. If they didn't repair it, she feared they would become the most bitter of enemies. She didn't want that. Oh gods, anything but that. If she would just listen.
Look at me.
The boot snapped shut. Is that a command, Your Grace? Yes, she replied quickly, but it needn't be. None of this need be, Rhaenyra. She reached out for her wrist. If you would but listen. Keep away from me. She slapped her hand aside and jolted to her feet. You aren't the queen yet.
Such anger in her voice. What could one do against such reckless hate?
I didn't do this to become queen.
Didn't you? Her eyes met her, red and damp. She must have been crying. You have no idea what it's like, do you? Her head tilted, regarding her like a dragon ready to bite. To have no power of your own. You've always done as your father asked, ever obeying like a good puppet. You must have jumped at the chance when he told you to bed him.
Her pride prickled at the slight. That's not true. I love the prince, just as I love you.
Love, she scoffed. What do you know of love? You stole him from me.
Was that what this was about? You never showed any interest in him. I was never given the chance to. She flung up her arms with an outraged cry. Instead he took everything from me. My father's dragon, my birthright, even you. And now you have the nerve, the gall, to come crawling back to me, seeking forgiveness. Something in her heart hardened. Quote. I did not come here for forgiveness. No. Rhaenyra crossed both arms before her bosom and scowled defiantly. Then why are you here? Calm. She mustn't get angry. Stay calm. She dared a step forward. Rhaenyra skittered backward, and so she took another, forcing her back again. I came here for understanding. There's nothing to understand. Rhaenyra took another step back, but failed when her back hit the very weirwood tree she'd been resting against. You betrayed me. You took him, when he was never yours to take. The words tore open an old wound and her temper snarled free like a plume of dragonfire. Then you should have said something. Her dear friend flinched, scowled, then rallied. How long? Please don't let her know. How long what? How long have you been carrying Naruto's child? Alicent flinched. She tried not to, but she couldn't help herself. Rhaenyra saw it. How could she not? Oh yes, she saw, and something dark and ugly flashed across her face. You really are, aren't you? She stepped to her and now it was she who retreated, warding one hand over her stomach. There's a little princess growing in your belly. Or a prince. Her smile turned bleak and a peal of bitter laughter tumbled from her lips. You were so eager to whore yourself out for him, and you think he loves you.
More than you. Alicent cursed herself the moment the words left her lips.
She hadn't meant to say that aloud words. Her brief, petty rush of satisfaction wasn't worth it, because now her dear friend looked livid. That tiny tableau of silence didn't last. Rhaenyra made a grab from her and she stepped back, retreating quickly. Her back smacked into a broad chest.
What's going on here?
Alicent whirled and found the prince himself standing behind her, flanked by Tarkus and Havel, face carved from stone. He laid a hand on her waist protectively and she shivered for all the wrong reasons. No, not like this. How much of that had he overhead? Some of it, all of it, none at all. She prayed for the latter. Alas, it was not to be.
Nothing at all, my love. The stammer was painfully obvious, even to her. We were just talking. He looked to Rhaenyra. Then why did she lunge at you?
You don't know, do you? She laughed at him. His brow furrowed, baffled. Know what?
Your whore is pregnant. Naruto froze.
Alicent buried her face in both hands. She wanted to weep. Rhaenyra was actively trying to hurt her now, determined to wound her in the worst of ways. Cruel, spiteful, wicked. What had become of her dear friend? Was it truly too late to pull her back from the brink? But really, the outraged Targaryen prattled on, you shouldn't be surprised. I'm sure this was her plan all along, to get herself with your child and lock you into marriage. She laughed again, a bitter despairing sound. I don't know why you're so shocked. But what can one expect from a filthy Hightower? Her shoulders swayed in a shrug as she shook her head. For all their preaching, all their morals, they really are a pack of degenerates and
Naruto slapped her.
Quote. Exclamation mark quote. Rhaenyra's head snapped to the side with a startled gasp. Stunned, for a moment it looked like she might burst into tears. Something deep inside her died in that moment. Alicent saw it. Her old friend touched a hand to her throbbing red cheek and sneered up at him. I shall wear this like a badge of honor. Naruto raised a fist and growled at her, his warning clear. Wear it in silence or I'll honor you again.
Alicent took her prince by the wrist and dragged him away before they could come to blows. Or worse. 0-0. She couldn't close the door behind them fast enough.
The very moment she did, his eyes were on her.
What's wrong?
Nothing is wrong. She wrung her hands, stared at the wall to master herself, inhaled a deep breath, and took the plunge. What Rhaenyra said was true. She raised her head and looked at him, tears welling up in her eyes. A tiny little hiccup escaped her as they spilled over her cheeks. Something wonderful has happened. You're going to be a father.
Naruto's face went blank. No, that wasn't the right word. His mind, his very existence, blanked out as his thoughts fizzled.
Well, a small, rational part of him mused. That was bound to happen sooner or later. The rest started whooping with incoherent joy. Something along the lines of, "I'm gonna be a dad. I must tell everyone."
And he would. In hindsight, Alicent probably expected so many things from him in that moment. Shock, anger, confusion at the very least. After all, she just sprung the mother of all surprises on him. She wasn't prepared for the sheer visceral flash of joy that swept across his face. In an instant he stepped to her side, swept her up heedless of her startled squeak, then spun her around, and pulled her into his arms.
Panic dawned a second later. "I'm sorry." He set her down and stepped back, holding her by the waist. "I shouldn't have done that. The baby." "It's fine." She sobbed a little, a delighted, happy sound, and buried her face against his chest, nuzzling him. "I'm not made of glass. You're not angry." Angry? Why would he be angry? He was going to be a father. Again. He'd do things right this time, wouldn't screw things up as he had in his last life, before he'd given said life to Balerion so long ago.
"You're right." He gave Alicent a light squeeze. This the best news I've had all year. Who else knows? Do the Maesters? ...
No, she shook her head. "Just you, and Rhaenyra." Her face crumpled and he read her like a book. She guessed. "Rhaenyra, ah, shit." He kissed her forehead with a sigh. "I shouldn't have slapped her back there." He saw the worry in her eyes and dipped lower, lips lingering on hers. "Now. It'll be all right. I'll talk to her. Everything's going to be all right."
Alicent no longer believed it would be. Not at all.